Hello, welcome to The Drum. I'm Julia Baird. Coming up, the former boyfriend of the woman at the centre of a rape allegation against Christian Porter becomes the latest voice to call for an inquiry. A dose of reality. The government revises their vaccination schedule, saying everyone should have received one jab by October. And how the West was won. Premier Mike McGowan looks to a thumping victory in tomorrow's state election, and the Libs contemplate a wipeout. Joining me on the panel this evening, host of RN Saturday Extra is back, Geraldine Du. Good to see you.
Hi, Julia.
In Melbourne, general practitioner, a very busy woman, Dr. Priya Alexander. Thanks for squeezing us in.
Hi, Julia.
Good doctor. In Perth, partner at EY, Adam Carell. Adam, great to see you.
Great to see you too.
In these exciting election times, which we will talk to you about shortly. And joining us very soon in Perth, co-chair of Reconciliation WA, Carol Innes. If you want to join us on Twitter, you know you can do it. You just have to use the hashtag #TheDrum. And we are also, for now, on Facebook. A former boyfriend of the woman at the centre of an historic rape allegation against Christian Porter has said that he had relevant discussions with her after the incident. Christian Porter has strenuously denied allegations he raped the 16-year-old in 1988 when he was 17. Macquarie executive James Hook was in a relationship with the woman in the late 1980s and is referred to in her diary.
Mine is just one set of recollections, and I am aware of the fallibility of human memory, however unintentional. That said, I have what I consider to be clear recollections of relevant discussions I've had with her over the years from mid-1988 until her death. I also have what I consider to be clear recollections of relevant discussions I had with Christian Porter from April 1992 in Perth and through the mid-1990s. The New South Wales Police have determined that a criminal prosecution is not possible in this case. I made myself known to New South Wales Police after her death, and I understand why they were unable to interview me. In relation to any criminal prosecution, Christian Porter was manifestly and appropriately entitled to the presumption of innocence. It is essential to the rule of law.
Mr Hook, who trained as a lawyer, supports an independent inquiry into the allegations and said he will testify under oath. It comes as New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller told a Senate estimates hearing that COVID restrictions had prevented them from taking a sworn statement from the woman before she died. And he reiterated the challenges, as we've discussed on The Drum, the challenges of prosecuting these crimes.
I'll give you these figures. I think of the 100% of complaints we get of adult sexual assault, are able to proceed on 10%. And I think we win 10% of those at trial, right? So it is hard.
Adam, to you, first of all, I mean, what this points to is that there may be, or there is claimed to be, more evidence that is not currently in the public domain. There are questions that have not been asked. There are things that have not been said. There are witnesses that have not been called. Do you think that that will kind of heighten or amplify those voices calling for an inquiry?
I think it will almost certainly amplify voices calling for an inquiry. I suspect it will even amplify those voices within the coalition. I mean, look, there has to be a reason why so many lawyer friends of mine, whom I really trust, and whom are no friends of Christian Porter, I might add, have generally been opposed to the idea of an inquiry. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to matters of the rule of law, but I am someone that has been involved in a number of extrajudicial inquiries. And for many inquiries, these inquiries always get to a point where the political and personal cost of avoiding an inquiry is greater than actually having the inquiry. And I suspect many people will be thinking we're at that point now in this instance, including, I suspect, within the coalition.
So what is your experience with these extrajudicial inquiries kind of taught you about how this one might be handled or might play out, the form it might take?
Well, look, I've never done anything that pertains to sexual assault, I should add. However, these matters are deeply sensitive, have to be done with extraordinary care. As James Hook pointed out, he has genuine concerns for Christian Porter as well as the alleged victim in this instance. And I might add, a statement did seem to be one that was very lucid and convincing. But look, these things are the reason why one would have an inquiry, particularly into an individual as opposed to a system, is that the consequences of that individual's behaviour have somehow become systemic, that they are eroding the public's faith and trust in institutions at large. And I suspect that must weigh heavily on any rationale for an inquiry here. But it is very hard to be able to staff one of these things. It's very hard to find people that can be demonstrated as being independent, that aren't either cherry-picked or a partisan appointment. So that's why I suppose people have recommended the use of retired ex-judges and other eminent persons. I think that makes a lot of sense. But these have to be done with immense caution. Otherwise, absolutely, they can do more harm than good. But as I say, speaking not as a lawyer at all, with any authority on matters of the rule of law, this does seem to today have ticked over to the period, that point at which an inquiry does more benefit to all parties involved, as opposed to simply one half of the argument.
Geraldine, the Prime Minister has said, look, he's innocent and there's no need for an inquiry. The police can't look at it, therefore that's the end of the road. It should only be viewed as something criminal. But given that someone like, when we have like senior business, well-respected business figures coming out who obviously don't want this played out in the media, who want a private inquiry but simply to testify at it, who don't appear to be looking at this through any partisan lens whatsoever, do you think that will have any impact on the government's resolve against an inquiry?
Honestly, I doubt it. I think that... Gosh, I've flip-flopped on this. I think the precedent of setting an inquiry into something that has been really prosecuted in the media, and he says he doesn't think the media is a very good place to play it out. He says that.
And that we don't have, like, there's evidence we do not have. So how can we?
Well, yes, but I think he's making a bigger argument, myself, I felt, about the nature of conversing around, I suppose, character and something that's a historical claim in the media. And I think so I was intrigued by what non-criminal aspects meant. He said, I'd be very prepared to testify on non-criminal aspects of this, which I sort of found that quite an intriguing statement. I mean, I sort of thought, look, if, the most competitive arena in this country is politics. So if you start leaving open an option that somebody can be removed from a senior position because of sort of general public concern, then I think you do open a bit of a Pandora's box.
Hasn't that happened in the past?
However, I have now listened, as we were saying there, to various very good legal commentators who say that it is within the purview of the law, that the management of the law has to also be seen to be above reproach, and that is clearly in question now. So I think probably it would help. It might even help the Attorney General if there was an inquiry. I mean, I don't know.
No, of course, we don't know.
I just don't know what the situation is. I really can't make up my mind.
No, we can only know how the government should be responding to the ongoing concerns and what is unresolved. But look, for more on this, we're joined in Sydney by Professor of Law at the University of New South Wales, Rosalind Dixon. Professor, welcome to The Drum.
Thanks, Julia.
How significant do you think this statement is by James Hook?
Well, I will say, I think there's a lot of calls already for an inquiry. I think those calls are very strong. But as Geraldine has said, the government's not particularly minded to heed them. I do think this puts additional pressure on the government from a respected and credible source. I know James, so I'm partial in saying that, but I think he is widely respected as credible, and it's a very balanced and very measured statement that says there was evidence that the New South Wales Police didn't have occasion to consider. And I think that strengthens the case for an independent inquiry. I don't think it's a knockout blow one way or another, but I do think it strengthens the case. And in my view, the case is already very strong for the reasons you've said, both in fairness to the attorney as well as for the public confidence in the legal system and fairness to complainants, that when there are credible allegations, they will be taken seriously and investigated. And the specifics here are very unique. You have a complaint that was not completed to the fullest extent because the complainant took her own life. And I think that is, obviously tragic, but it also means that the complaint wasn't processed in the ordinary way by the police. And that's quite a unique set of circumstances. So the sort of floodgates concerns that people like Geraldine and others rightly have, I think are actually answered by the fact that this is the chief law officer of the country, a credible allegation that was never able to be fully investigated in the criminal context because of the unique set of circumstances. And I think this new statement adds further weight to what is already a strong case for both the attorney and complainant's sense of justice and procedural justice to have a proper independent inquiry.
And can I ask you in particular about the way he's written about what seems to be, he keeps referring to as contemporaneous conversations with the alleged victim who was his girlfriend. There's been some discussion about what he actually meant. He said it was in 1988, which was the year, of course, the alleged assault, the assault was alleged to have occurred. He says, when he says, mine is just one set of recollections, I'm aware of the fallibility of human memory, however unintentional. That said, I have what I consider to be clear recollections of relevant discussions I had with the woman over the years from mid-1988 to her death. I also have what I consider to be clear recollections of relevant discussions with Christian Porter from April 1992 in Perth and through the mid-1990s. Do you see an ambiguity there around the using of the phrase recollections of relevant discussions?
I don't think it's actually appropriate for us to pass the statement too closely in that way, although I can see why a journalistic and incisive mind might do exactly what you're suggesting we do. I think what we need to do is say there is a person with real credibility coming forward saying they've got additional useful and relevant information that they'd be willing to provide to a confidential independent inquiry that's never been investigated by the police and that adds to the calls for an inquiry. And I think that the point Geraldine makes about trial by media should cause us to hesitate about passing those words. You know, I want to stress what a legal inquiry would do. Yes. It would look at the complaint and it would look at supporting or corroborating evidence. Were there contemporaneous statements by the complainant that give us confidence this is not only a recent recollection that strengthens our belief in the credibility of her complaint? Are there any things that she said to others at the time? Are there things that would corroborate her story in terms of what the attorney or anyone else heard, said or did? On the attorney's side, you would expect his lawyers, and I said today in the SMH, much as I want an inquiry, I also think he deserves legal representation without fear or favour in any proceedings that he may wish to take or face in an inquiry. His lawyers would say, well, what was her mental state at all relevant times? What was the degree of her certainty or recollection? Were there any other corroborating statements? Were they reliable? Did she have motive to lie? Do we have confidence given the lapse of time? And lapse of time is a serious obstacle in criminal prosecution to conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. Does the lapse of time and human fallibility mean that we can, on a balance of probabilities, reach a conclusion that this is made out? So these are all questions that are absolutely the questions we should be asking. But I do want to stress that I think they are questions that need to be asked in an independent inquiry, not in the media, and that this new statement simply adds further credibility and seriousness to the calls for an inquiry. And I think, I think it's a great set of questions, but unfortunately they're the questions that need to be asked in an inquiry, not here tonight.
Okay. Priya, can I just point to, we played before the reference to New South Wales Police Commissioner Mick Fuller, saying this, referring to figures that we have spoken about before, but they don't get less startling, right? That of 100% of complaints they get of sexual assault, only 10% proceed. Only 10% of those result in a conviction. I think it's actually 7% in New South Wales.
Historic sexual assault, I think he said. Historic. It's not just all sexual assault, it's historical sexual assault, I think.
Well, we will check on that.
I think it was all.
It's all, because I actually did look this up on the weekend. Over the last kind of couple of years in New South Wales, it's a 7% conviction rate for all those charges that are laid. It is 7% or 7 to 8% of 10%. And he says it's hard for the victim. It's often only when you have other evidence, forensic independent witnesses who almost saw the crime, that we are able to secure conviction. So we actually need someone to have seen it, almost have seen it. And he said, look, I understand the interest in this, but don't let it be lost on what we need to change is the journey for victims in the justice system, which is a hugely significant thing to say for the head of police. Like the justice system is failing our victims effectively. What can be done about this?
Oh, this is so complex. And as a GP, you know, I see a lot of victims of sexual assault, and I, you know, go through their journey through the justice system with them, and it is extremely traumatic. And I think it's been discussed quite heavily in the media, the fact that this alleged victim did try to, you know, start a case or whatever the term is, but withdrew it. And that's not uncommon. It tells you how much judgment, shame, you know, the barriers that these victims face in coming forward. And so, you know, there's a lot that needs to change. There needs to be far more support. And I think that it really matters how we deal with something like this that's happening right now. An independent inquiry sends a message to other victims of sexual assault and says, we hear you, we see you. New South Wales Police cannot act on this because the alleged victim has committed suicide tragically. But you know, there are still unanswered questions, and, you know, everyone needs to have their kind of issues explored. The victim, her family, the Attorney General, he's still got this hanging over him, and he deserves to, you know, at least say his piece as well. There's victims of sexual assault widely who are watching on, and I think what we do here is going to affect their journey in the future if they choose to come forward.
It's amazing, that kind of impact. And we did just check those figures, and that is right.
Okay, sorry.
7 to 8% of 10%. It's a fraction.
Oh, it's terrible. I didn't realise it was quite as low.
Carol Innes, can I bring you in here? Because I know that Indigenous women know very well the failings of the criminal justice system, as well as Indigenous men. What do you think can be done to shift the system? I mean, there must be, in your view, some really fundamental, you know, issues that require addressing. Or do you also see some low-hanging fruit?
Thank you. There's not a lot I can comment around the broader conversation that we've had so far, but I just feel that it has to lead to systemic change within where people report, how they report, what's the support structure around the reporting of it all, and how the families and others are supported through the process. Many people, I mean, just this week in International Women's Day, hearing some raw stories from families who've been affected by crimes and the women's voice. It's been a very difficult process of seeing many people who have been a part of that sharing their stories and feeling like they're alone in many of these circumstances. So I think whilst, you know, the conversation around an inquiry is important, we need to work to more than just that space. We need to think about what are the systems we've got in place to allow women and victims of crime to be better supported.
Yep, something we definitely need to keep returning to. We're out of time here.
Oh, are we? Out of...
Yeah,
I would do it. Well, I'll just ask Rosalind Dixon, is there some other venue discussed in the law about sexual assault cases? Lawyers have said to me, we're not good at sex cases. Whether
lawyers,
you've got one,
full stop.
Some lawyers, some lawyers have said to me, we don't do it well. And these statistics, is there, you know, like we develop restorative justice for youth. Is there some other discussion being had among the law reform types about other venues? I just wondered if Rosalind knew.
Rosalind, we're almost out of time, but just very quickly to you.
Not enough, but you could have a civil kind of victims comp type model that would do a lot for restorative justice. I think we saw that recently in the Defence Force. We could do more, Geraldine. There's precedents out there. We're not doing enough, but I agree with Carolina wholeheartedly. We should be focusing on prevention through affirmative consent and consent education, talk about the role of alcohol and vulnerability, and I think also about thinking about civil redress in addition to criminal redress. The investigation here is partly about civil redress, and I think you're right, Geraldine, that there are precedents and there are potentials for reform in that context more systematically.
Terrific to have you and your expertise on the show this evening. Rosalind Dixon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Rosalind Dixon, she's a Professor of Law at the University of New South Wales. And if you have been affected by anything we've been discussing, call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or 1800 RESPECT on 1800 737 732. This weekend, Western Australia goes to the polls in an election that was apparently done and dusted more than a fortnight ago. The Liberal Party's Zac Kirkup has made it clear that he doesn't expect to win. Perhaps he won't even keep his seat. This morning, he appeared on the radio with a rallying cry for the final 24 hours before voting begins. We've done everything we can. Labor's Mark McGowan has appeared unassailable throughout the campaign, riding high on an economy largely untroubled by the pandemic and a population kept COVID-free behind their borders. But questions remain. How big will his victory be? What will he do with a mandate of that size? How long can his popularity last? Well, the Drum's Eliza Harvey has more.
Premier Mark McGowan has the coronavirus to thank for his evolution from hard-bitten politician.
We're not going to give in to that sort of bullying by the New South Wales Premier or anyone else.
To humorist.
There's nothing wrong with going for a run and having a kebab.
To heartthrob.
And here's my knight in shining armour. Whenever we're together, I'm not worried about Clive Palmer.
There's no doubt that WA's ability to stay mostly COVID-free has helped Labor's chances at tomorrow's poll. But things have been grim for the Liberals for a while. They received their lowest vote ever at the 2017 election. Even so, this comment from the opposition leader a fortnight ago came as a shock.
I'm not going to stand there and look the people of Western Australia in the eye and ask them to choose between Mark and I when they already expect that Mr McGowan will be the Premier after this election.
The strategy has now shifted to saving the furniture.
This is about us fighting harder than ever before. This is a call to arms for the Liberal Party to make sure you join us and in doing everything we can to hold Labor to account.
The ABC's election analyst Anthony Green says it's a brave move.
It's a hard tactic to basically admit you're not going to win.
But not necessarily surprising, given the risks Zac Kirkup has taken during his brief stint in the top job. He committed to phasing out coal by 2025, despite an industry that supports thousands of workers in the southwest town of Collie. The Liberals also committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2030 and investing $400 million in renewable energy jobs like wind and hydrogen energy production. The government's strength comes down to its management of the pandemic and a booming economy.
In the state budget at the end of last year, they announced they had a surplus. Now, that's the only state that's got it at the moment, and given the world's economy at the moment, that's something to hang your hat on.
Anthony Green says managing that money could be a challenge. And just like the Queensland election, there could also be some federal implications from Saturday's result.
But the simple mathematics is the coalition holds 34 of 46 seats in those two states. And if there is any swing against the coalition, that wipes out their majority in Canberra.
Adam, our man in Perth, an expected swing of 12.5% is pretty astonishing. What do you attribute to this to, and how much of it is COVID?
COVID is the better part of it, but it hasn't just been COVID. I mean, his popularity is astonishing, and it eats into the kind of historic blue ribbon western suburbs that have been a sure thing for the Liberal Party for generations. He's immensely well liked. I think his popularity at points have got as high as it's ever got in any democracy that is where one can rely upon. It's quite remarkable. I also wouldn't discount the incredible impact of the kebab conference, the press conference. It seemed to come at a certain moment in kind of COVID-related anxiety where we saw this Premier show their humanity behind the lectern, and half the state fell in love with him in that moment and have stayed in love with him ever since. So it's quite extraordinary.
Right. Just that single moment, or what that moment represented, because I remember everyone falling about laughing at that, because it did just seem to just like reveal a level of ridiculousness that we were getting to and trying to live with, right?
It did, and he managed to combine in that moment the strength, and he really played. West Australians throughout COVID have been playing out a genuine fantasy for succession. We've always kind of fantasised about the idea of splitting away from the rest of this country.
Yes, we know.
And McGowan has strategically played to that instinct of West Australians. At the same time, he has kind of, he has been humane and has been willing to wander off script, and people love that. He has been the picture of what a centrist can really achieve, particularly in a state like Western Australia, which is generally relatively centre-right. I can say, though, can I just say, though, as someone that cares a lot about climate change, and if I don't get the microphone again on this topic, I do want to say that if Zac Kirkup gets wiped out tomorrow and people start to wonder what his political legacy is, please let it be remembered that he was the first Liberal politician ever to outflank Labor on climate action.
Tell us why you think that is significant.
It's significant, A, because it's never been done. It's significant because he's done it in the face, I'm sure, of instant flamograms that would have come at him from his peers in Canberra. But because we have been tied up in the culture wars of climate change for 15 years, and it's been basically a product of the coalition being opportunists in playing to the fears of people regarding climate transition. Zac Kirkup's come out and done the exact opposite. And in doing so, he's really highlighted how weak McGowan is on climate change and how unnecessarily weak McGowan is on climate change. He's got one of the most commanding majorities in history. He's got a budget surplus. There's a buzz in the streets of Perth right now. We're optimistic for the future. Why on climate change is he so interested in kind of hoarding political capital than actually expending it on this urgent topic for our nation's, for our state's future?
I guess the question is, Geraldine, whether Zac Kirkup's positioning on this, with all the kind of the debate around costings and what it would actually mean to have a green revolution, will change things ongoing in WA. Also the political risk he took, as Adam's saying.
Yeah, I think it's bold.
Yeah.
I think it's quite bold. I think Adam's right. I think it could well be that it's sort of a down payment for the future in trying to reposition the Libs a bit. But, you know, they've had a lot of issues for many years. They go up and down, and they're seems to me very reliant on particular personnel. I mean, I suppose all political parties are to some extent, but I think. Yeah, I think we might look back and say this was quite an important effort to reposition. But I mean, I've been told by I'm a West Australian, that there's a sort of, they're mesmerised at the moment. All manner of people are sort of mesmerised by McGowan.
Tell us why, not just the kebab, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I don't know. I've rung people today and said, I'm going on the drum, give me, and people find it hard to put words to it. I think I think the money flow in WA matters hugely.
It's also the sense of what's being done with that money and whether there's been sufficiently safe stewardship, what we've learnt from the last boom.
Yeah, well, nobody seems to be asking that a lot.
Right.
It's just that the money's flowing,
right,
and they feel safe. And so I'm sure apparently he's not super popular inside Labor, interestingly enough. There's little, and he will win like...
It's the Kevin Rudd factor.
Well, John Howard won that extraordinary victory where he, whichever year it was, and he found it was a sort of a monkey on his back where he won both the Senate and the House. And keeping everybody in line is much harder when you have those thumping...
Is that 96? Carol, what do you see as the major issues? This is your home state. What do you think is really going to define the election? And is it being defined in the way you want it to be?
I can be parochial West Australian, but I also think that with where Mark McGowan has been stellar in the space of the COVID and keeping the country, the state safe, has been a big part of that. But I also see that a lot more work has to be done around how we manage better going toward. We don't know what's ahead of us still. We're still in that uncertainty. We've got some big changes with the Minister for Indigenous Affairs stepping down. Who's going to take that on from my point, from a National Affairs point of view? So there's a lot of who's going to be the next Indigenous Affairs Minister. So we're in a bit of wonderland with that. However, I think that the work that needs to be done, I think, is really important around the collaborative space between all parties in managing crisis. I think that's been shown really quite powerful into the future, and I think we need to think about a lot more of that. And, the climate change stuff is really important too, and I think that's where we probably need to think a bit of that when you consider the weather that we're having in Perth currently at the moment. you know, the humidity is just pretty full on at the moment. That's a health effect for many people suffering asthma and things like that. So, yeah, I guess it's a wait and see, and it's been for the opposition to come out and declare that space was a bit of bravado, I think, from my point of view. But, you know, some messages left clearly there is that we need to collaborate a little bit more and be respectful of the issues that we deal with at hand, because we've got bigger issues other than just COVID on our doorstep.
And just quickly though, do you feel that we were talking about what happened with the last boom, whether sufficient money was put into saving or was putting into, you know, some kind of the bigger structural issues that you're talking about? Do you feel that Mark McGowan will be doing that when it comes to Indigenous matters, when it comes to entrenched poverty and questions of regional health, for example?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a review on that, and I think they were looking to bring out the empowerment strategy through Indigenous Affairs or Aboriginal Affairs within the state, and a lot of review of the Aboriginal Heritage Act. So there's a number of big ticket items that we need to take into consideration in regards to Aboriginal affairs and how that interplays. Also, too, the big thing for, you know, a personal attachment for me is around the Southwest settlement with government that's gone into play now, with a part of how this new government, you know, whether it is Labor guarantee, but how that plays out and how we work together for making it happen and working together and seeing no failure.
Priya, if I can go to Victoria now. When Geraldine is talking about the way people, what were the words you used? Mesmerised by Mark McGowan. And there's been also in Victoria quite a fierce loyalty towards Dan Andrews. Do you see similarities in that?
No, honestly, I wasn't expecting this question. No, I don't. I don't think people here are mesmerised. I think we've been through too much with respect to COVID. And I think people now they were quite mesmerised with the Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton. He's on a lot of billboards and T-shirts.
Right.
But, yeah, I think it's slightly different. We haven't had the same experience of, you know, kind of being separated from Australia and this idyllic paradise. We've been in lockdown for months and months and months and had failures of our hotel quarantine system. So I don't think it is the same, sadly, for poor Dan.
Yeah, I did mean on a fierce loyalty level, but you're right. There's been a lot of certainly passionate expressions of affection played out in cushions and songs and various placards. It's quite alarming. You are watching The Drum. With me on the panel, host of RN Saturday Extra, Geraldine Doog; in Melbourne, general practitioner Dr. Priya Alexander; in Perth, partner at EY, Adam Carell; and also in Perth, co-chair of Reconciliation WA, Carol Innes. By close of business today, more than 135,000 Australians will have received their first COVID jab. But the government's been walking back its commitment to have every eligible Australian vaccinated by the end of October.
We were clear a month ago that the October deadline would not include the second dose. The Minister said that a month ago, and that's what Professor Murphy said yesterday. So that's what the government's saying. What you're reporting is up to you. But what the government has said has been very clear. And it was the move from 4 weeks to 12 weeks, which meant the second dose being completed by the end of October for all of those who were seeking them. That wasn't going to be possible. The Minister made that point.
Scott Morrison is emphatic that the government has been consistent with its messaging, but here's the Health Minister giving an update 10 days ago.
Experts say, based on the current rollout, we're not going to meet the target of vaccinating all Australians by the end of October. Is that still a realistic timeframe?
Look, that remains our objective and our timeframe. What this is about is a ramp up.
So, 19 days into the rollout, how do we compare with other nations at the same point? In the United States, more than 4 million people had received their first dose. In India, 4.1. In Israel, 1.8 million, and around 1 million people in the UK. According to the government, our rollout has stalled because of supply issues. But domestic distribution also appears to be proving challenging. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister tweeted that there were now 1.3 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine in the country, but that means just 10% have made it into people's arms. Priya, as someone who is administering this and probably currently exhausted by trying to get this into people's arms at the moment, can you tell us, do you feel sufficiently briefed on the rollout? How's it playing out at a clinical level?
So I'm in a clinic that is going to be one of the 4,000 clinics that will deliver this vaccine. We haven't started yet. Honestly, it has felt slightly haphazard, and it definitely feels like communication has been lacking. It's a big undertaking. The targets that have been set are huge and they're ambitious. They're doable, but they're very ambitious. And I think what people probably don't appreciate is how much of a logistical nightmare this really is and how much work is going in on the ground. Now, our clinic is preparing for this vaccine rollout, but, you know, people are kind of talking about the funding that GPs are talking about, the remuneration that the government has developed for us to deliver this vaccine. And, you know, people always go, oh, doctors are talking about money. That's what I've seen in the media. I've had people say it to me. But the truth is this rollout is going to be really tricky. We're essentially going to be neutral, if not negative, by delivering this vaccine and getting it into people's arms. The way the government has set up the funding is basically saying, you know, this is a short consult, you know, get the needle into people's arms. But they haven't taken into account this is not the flu vaccine. This is a new vaccine people haven't received before. They have questions, they need counselling. This is new for us, it is new for them. And so it is not going to be a 5-minute appointment, and the remuneration is just not going to cover admin extras that are going to be required, nursing staff who are going to need to be required for these clinics, and consumables and things. And so, you know, it doesn't feel that smooth, and there is certainly lacking communication from the federal government.
How do you think we could possibly meet this target then? I mean, the US is allowing dentists and vets to administer vaccines. Is that the kind of measure that we will need?
I don't know. Like, counselling is a huge portion of this vaccine. So at the moment, the health profession, and I'm talking about GPs, other doctors, pharmacists, midwives, maternal child health nurses, we are all battling vaccine hesitancy. We are battling misinformation on social media. So counselling is a huge part of this vaccine delivery. Getting people feeling confident, answering their questions, making them feel confident to come back for that second dose, which is crucial. And so I don't think you can just get everyone kind of administering it because the counselling is such an important part. But I think we need to think more about, you know, setting up hubs for these other phases as they already exist. But, you know, big dedicated hubs to get people through where GPs go, and we're not seeing our regular patients. We're simply dedicated to these hubs for the day. At the moment, we're being asked to vaccinate people, and we've got full books. We've got all our people who need their cervical cancer screening test and who are struggling with depression. Fitting the vaccine and counselling on top of that is a big ask, and especially when you're not being well remunerated for it, or, you know, it's effectively neutral, if not negative.
Carol, Priya was just mentioning the question of hesitancy, and it's been found that in some Indigenous communities, misinformation and hesitancy has been proving a barrier and is of concern. Now, we do know that many Indigenous Australians are set to receive the vaccine as part of 1B phase that's meant to roll out in just 10 days. What are communities doing to ensure that this rollout goes smoothly?
I think a lot of the work that Aboriginal health controlled organisations have been working on has been to ensure that they're working to their clients. So I couldn't speak for where it's up to now. A lot of people are feeling the fear and you know, a lot of stress around it. A lot of people don't understand it because, you know, firstly it was just going to be a certain age group, and now it's a whole community. So there's a whole lot of implications on how people will feel with that. And I don't know what the measures are put in place to how to support people after that as well. I know there's been a lot of stress between people managing other chronic illnesses that they have themselves and forgetting about their own healthcare with that because of what we've had to deal with the COVID restrictions and in the past. So it's it's well and good to say that and put those initiatives forward, but I think it's how we manage the next part of that and how people are feeling with it, because we're all heading into uncertain waters.
Now, Adam, the government is blaming supply here as part of the problem from European nations, but we do know that there's 10 times as much vaccine waiting to be administered than what's been put into people's arms already. Shouldn't these kinds of logistics have been sorted out some time ago?
Look, I defer, of course, to Priya's vastly superior knowledge of this topic than me. But as a private citizen observing this issue, I'm amazed by how quickly we've become frustrated with the rollout of the vaccine. I mean, it was less than a year ago that on this show, I remember there being some eminent scientists on it suggesting that, the world should prepare itself for there not being a vaccine for 2 years, let alone one that's passed clinical trials and is able to be rolled out. Here we are 11 months later, and brilliant minds have produced this vaccine, and it's now being put into the arms of citizens around the world in this vast mobilisation. I can't think of anything more significant in terms of the collective feat of science since the moon landing. And I'm probably missing something, but it blows me away. I think the people that have achieved this are phenomenal. So I think while there are so many reasons to kind of gnash our teeth at our various governments.
Come on, have a gnash.
I'm so impressed. I failed science in year 12, so maybe I put these people on the pedestal too much. But it's me. It's amazing. And look, yes, the European countries are brought. And look, if even then, this might be, again, characteristically ill-informed. I can't get that angry, though, if Italy are hoarding some vaccines, because extra vaccine use in Italy will stop people from dying. While, of course, we are already at risk of another outbreak here, there does seem to be a kind of utilitarian logic to the vaccines being administered at scale in the countries of which they are. I think we can sit back and not panic too much about it not being at a similar level. Again, not an epidemiologist.
Geraldine, how do you view it? Because it's true that there is significant goodwill when it comes to the way the government has handled COVID and an appreciation of that. In the UK, though, we've seen the vaccine rollout handled so deftly that Boris Johnson's gone up in the pot, had a little bit of a bump after all of that. Yeah. If we get this wrong, or it goes out longer than we think, or we're not able to travel as early as we might be, or do you think that could have the reverse impact here?
Yeah, I'm with Adam. I mean, I just think he did put that absolutely brilliantly. I mean, we hear that it's the state governments that have really been given the big ticks, not the federal governments for the management of this, even though the feds are the ones paying the bills.
You say people aren't mesmerised by Scott Morrison.
Right, they don't appear to be mesmerised. Quite right. Look, I suppose we were warned, weren't we, by Greg Hunt several times. There will be snafus that we can't predict. And I remember thinking to myself, now what is he, what's he talking about really? Not being, aware of what Priya's talking about. And here they are, including, Greg Hunt getting cellulitis, for goodness sake. And you just do wonder whether that's affected people. I mean, my late husband had cellulitis, and I know
it is awful.
It is an awful business, and you just
it keeps coming back.
It does.
The time.
You just got to sit there and that intravenous antibiotics. And I don't think it's got anything to do, from what I know, with the vaccine. But look, I think it's just not rolling out according to plan. Now, is Accenture in charge of this? Like, I mean, the people who are, the firm that has been put in charge, I just can't work out who's actually responsible for it.
Well, so we're being told it's both distribution and supply.
Yes. I mean, I did see the Prime Minister say, I know it was actually, I think, Brendan Murphy say, when CSL starts producing 1 million vials a week in Broadmeadows at CS, then we will really see we're cooking with gas. I'm choosing to actually accept that, I think, because I want my vaccination before winter.
Yeah, and we want herd immunity. We want herd immunity. Priya, you're nodding there. Just final reflections on what we've been talking about. Can we afford to go slow, as the Prime Minister is saying? We need to be cautious.
Well, we're in a very privileged position in Australia because we are, you know, at the moment we don't actually have any community transmission of COVID that we are aware of, which is wonderful. So I know what Adam's saying, you know, absolutely. It's wonderful that, you know, if Italy can vaccinate their population given what they're going through. But what we're saying is there are vaccines sitting in Australia that are not getting into arms.
Yeah,
why aren't they in clinics? Why aren't we getting them into our patients? You know, why have, you know, doctors not been told to do the modules? There's been all these kind of small logistical things that all add up that, you know, I think we know, Australians know, the world knows that this vaccination, along with measures like mask wearing where it's appropriate and washing your hands, is crucial to us returning to a somewhat normal life. So people are desperate. You know, we're waiting. And so I don't think we're being impatient and awful. I think we're just going, we really, really want our old life back, and this is one step to getting there.
Priya, I know this is something that you've been vocal about on social media. Do you think doctors have been hamstrung in what they can say about the vaccine? If I came into your office and said, I'm really torn, I don't know which one's better, Pfizer or AstraZeneca, or what can I do? Are you able to fully consult me there?
So we've been more hamstrung on social media. Essentially, the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, came out, I think it was about a week ago, and said, you know, doctors need to be really careful, or all health professionals need to be very careful sharing their expert views on vaccination on social media, lest it induces someone to seek out vaccination. And meanwhile, you've got Gwyneth Paltrow and other unqualified people talking about, you know, health misinformation and telling people all sorts of hogwash about vaccines that's just not true. So if someone comes into my room, I can talk to them. So I can absolutely talk to them about the vaccines. It's more on social media where restrictions have been placed. But can I just say very clearly, we are not writing you a script for a vaccine. You're not going and taking a script to the chemist to get it filled and come back and see us. We don't choose what you get. We are given it by the federal government and we administer it. So there's no choice. There's no, you know, which one's better. Let's have a bit of a, you know, a chat about it. There's one. There's one choice at this present time for anyone who is not in phase 1A.
All right. Well, Joe Biden has been giving an optimistic address to the nation, saying all Americans will have access to a COVID vaccine from the 1st of May. And the president has called on some familiar faces to help encourage citizens to go out and get jabbed.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
I want to go back to work and I want to be able to move around.
To visit with Michelle's mom, to hug her and see her on her birthday.
You know what I'm really looking forward to is going to opening day in Texas Ranger Stadium with a full stadium.
We've lost enough people and we've suffered enough damage.
In order to get rid of this pandemic, it's important for our fellow citizens to get vaccinated.
Oh, just one or two familiar faces there that we might have seen. All right, on to something else now, because it wasn't that long ago that Aboriginal Australians, and we forget this, were forbidden to speak their languages and punished for doing so. But now many schools are incorporating Indigenous language as part of the Australian curriculum. Mossman State School in Queensland is one of them. And their award-winning Gugu Yalanji program proved so popular that the school had to create 3 new classrooms to cater for the demand from students. The Drum's Stephanie Bolchi sat in for a class.
Places and animals. What do you call a sea?
These Year 6 kids are speaking Gugun Yalanji.
And the reef.
Well, it's pretty important because lots of people use it around here.
How'd you say you went to the rainforest?
Only a handful of elders in Mossman speak Gugun Yalanji, prompting concerns that the language could be lost.
It's not just a language as well, it's the, you know, the stories I teach the kids. It's actual culture that I teach the kids at school. Sophie?
I really like it when we hear stories about the local areas, and when we go there and like next with our families and stuff, we can go, oh, I remember this from the story.
Welcome.
My grandfather, he speaks Yalanji and he was teaching us a little bit of it.
Perfect. Good work.
Gugun Yalanji woman Talia Birchall was the inaugural language teacher. She played a key role in the course's implementation.
It's also allowed us to then preserve and protect
with our younger generation now, sharing language again as if it's normal, as if it, it's not something that should be forbidden or foreign to us, but it's a part of our identity.
Juan is normally a tour guide, but when Talia left for other opportunities, he gave language teaching a go.
Okay, so dungai is I'm going, dungan, I went. If we teach it at the school, the kids are using it more often in the playground and in the street and in general chit-chat. The stronger the language will become, the more often it'll get used and the less chance of it disappearing.
Dad went to the sea.
Mossman regularly gets calls from other schools keen to take a look, and the kids love it too.
It makes me want to come to school even more than I do want to come to school.
Now it's only the start of the year, but at the moment I think all classes are over 95% in attendance.
The school principal says there's been a noticeable reduction in vandalism since the consultation began, with 350 break-ins in 2013 down to just one last year. And he says suspensions are nearly a thing of the past, due to the pride kids now have. Juan's daughter Millie is one of his students, learning at home and at school.
We've got a really big family on my dad's side, and we're all Guguyalanji, so we all speak little bits of the language that we're familiar with.
It took years of consultation with the community and elders for the program to be created, and there's an advisory group that also helps to work on the lesson plans. Auntie Janice Walker says she worked behind the scenes and is helping Juan to educate the youngsters.
It will put a sense of pride back into our Indigenous community, our children at school. It's a good way of closing the gap, bridging the gap.
And what did it mean to you to have your peers, your classmates, start to learn a language that is part of your history?
It was really nice to know, because then they know a little bit of our history and they can teach other people about our history and the language.
All right, you're a Jumma Nigel. I'll see you all after.
What a wonderful story and program. We have our intrepid reporter Steph Bolchi to thank for that. Now, we want to talk about the family drama that has captivated us all this week. You know which one I'm talking about, right? Prince William has weighed in on Prince Harry's interview with Oprah. The future King of England is the first from the family to speak publicly about his brother and sister-in-law's accusations of racism.
Can you just let me know, is the royal family a racist family, sir?
No, we're very much not a racist family.
The brothers are yet to speak to each other, but Prince William confirmed they will soon. Now, Carol, I want to ask you, how did you read Meghan Markle's comments about race? On one hand, it seems to have galvanised people who have experienced racism and who understand racism. And on the other hand, she also speaks from an enormous position of privilege.
Yeah, it is a really difficult space, but interracial marriages across the world brings back, and I think sometimes it has to an onus back on the family, on how family embraces this, because if you know you're safe in family, you take on the world. And there was in what the decision that made them leave country and home and place, it must have been deep. So any sight of racism, and it's really hard, like I said, to talk about racism from a position of privilege and everything else, but it still hurts, and it's the child is the one that's that suffers. So racism is in our community. It's in every part of what we do. When you think about what we've had just recently in the Collingwood Football Club, a lot of what we've got to do and take on board from a society space is that we have to push racism back to the past. We can't do that to go forward, because our community has suffered enough. Our people have suffered enough, and I think to keep bringing it forward into the space, we've got to change a lot of systems around how we manage that and educate people in many fronts. And I think the story just there around the beauty of teaching language and bringing that back into our schools, was we never had that, and we're still doing a lot of that here in WA. I mean, we've got one part of the state that is very strong and fluent in their language and cultural practice, and that, you know, the northern part of the state and the eastern part. But, you know, within the southwest, which is where I live and is my home, a lot of that was taken from us. A lot of that was, you know, our cultural practice and way of being was taken from us. So when I think about what they're probably going through, and it comes down to the colour of skin, and that's what's probably the most hardest thing for her to probably have to deal with, because she's probably suffered that all her life. So I don't think we should make things lightly of this, you know, you know, but it's hard when it happens, that what we have to deal with to just be a family and for a young life to prosper, that weight is still on young people today. So racism is an institution issue, and you know, the monarchy is the institution that needs to probably take a better place. It is, rather than making a statement, is to look at what we need to do to embrace, because they are still family.
Adam, Carol talks there about the past. Now, we have Prince William very quickly to say we're not a racist family, but is part of the problem and part of the response to these allegations or these statements by Meghan Markle is a discussion of empire and the legacy of colonialism and the involvement of the royal family and all of that.
Absolutely. And I think Carol's remarks then were so well made. But you're right, Julie. And I say this, Julie, I know you are an eminent scholar of the royal family, so I hope I don't upset you by saying this, but I think this conversation has really brought out how much of an anachronism they really are. And if I don't think that Prince William is a racist, not that I have any basis for thinking that, but he doesn't come across as one at all. But is the royal family, if not racist, a highly racialised institution? Yes, it is. Perhaps the worst one can think of. I mean, here is an example of a group of people whom, by the pure accident of birth, have been put above the rest of people in society. They tried to keep their bloodline pure over the years, only intermingling with the other, you know, royal families in Europe.
Other cousins, usually.
Yes. First cousins. Victorian era colonialism. Sorry, I'm cutting you off. There's a lag on my line. Sorry.
Oh no, that's fine.
Just to say, yeah, well, just to round that out, to be able to say, in terms of Carol's experience, the royal family was, you know, exemplified the kind of imperialism that institutionalised racism around the world, and which scholars like Edward Said and others have said still defines the lives of many people across the post-colonial world. So I hope this is a moment by which we step back and say, we all evolved from the same kind of microbe here. Why on earth do we still put people on a pedestal just because of their heritage? It's bizarre to me.
Do you think, Geraldine, that more people are going to be asking this? I mean, the Republican movement was pretty quickly
out of the box.
Some bells about this. Yeah.
Yes, look, who knows? I don't know. I think, again, playing the long game, I think the Royals will be just fine in the long game about this. I think the people who will actually, my personal view is that Harry and Meghan are going to pay an incredible price for this interview. That's my view, especially Harry.
Why?
Oh, look, I just think that it was ill-judged. That's my view. I think to me, it was playing to an American audience and not an English audience. With all, you know, I mean, of course, it's
massive audience.
Yeah, I mean, I just think in the long run, I just don't think this is going to do them any good, whatever. And I think it's going to be very sad in the long run.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave, unfortunately, on a very sad note there. But there's plenty of food for thought in that interview and all of the discussions that have come out of it afterwards, particularly in terms of race. As our panellists have said, I want to thank them: Geraldine Duke, Dr. Priya Alexander, Adam Carell, Carol Innes. Hope you have a really great weekend. I'm going to see you next week. Ellen will be with you on Monday. Have a good night.